We have weeks 11, 12, 13, 14, and then the fantasy football playoffs are here, ladies and gentlemen. I know a lot of people who have already won 6, 7 games are looking ahead to these playoffs. So I'm going to go through our top 10 playoff schedules for wide receivers in this video. Now, we will give some honorable mentions out the gate. Buffalo maybe is an honorable mention here. I mean, you have Dallas, the Chargers, and the Pats. Dallas, very tough matchup. That would be something you are looking to avoid. But if you have a first round bye and you get by the Dallas Cowboys matchup, then you're going up against the Chargers and Pats. Chargers, 5th most points allowed to opposing wide receivers so far this season. Knowing how the Chargers can move the ball down the field as well, that game could have shootout potential. And then the Patriots have allowed the 11th most points to opposing wide receivers. The issue that you would have is possibly with that game. I mean, you have the Buffalo Bills leading by multiple touchdowns, running the ball in the second half, yada, yada, yada. That is an outside possibility, but still, nonetheless, this is a set of matchups that you don't need to be afraid of. Now, going over to the Jets, I mean, here you have one great matchup that's going to be against Washington in Week 16. Dolphins, whatever matchup, Week 15. We know that this will be a team that has to throw the ball consistently against the Dolphins. Now, the tough spot with the Jets and Garrett Wilson is you will be going up against the Cleveland Browns, which is why they're not going to make the top 10 in this list, because against the Browns, they are 31st in points allowed to opposing wide receivers. Probably not something that we are super excited to go up against. If you're looking at where Garrett Wilson currently is in the flogfantasy.com community rankings, he is currently at 45 overall. He is hovering around wide receiver 18. So I think Garrett Wilson honestly could be a buy here if you potentially wanted to move off of Tank Dell and pivot over in that direction. Now, going over to our next team, our first team inside the top 10 will be the Giants. The Giants, you have no brutal matchups. You go up against the Saints. You go up against the Rams. They're definitely not good matchups there. They are 25th and 22nd allowed to opposing wide receivers. But the Eagles have allowed the most points to opposing wide receivers so far this season. Obviously, you can't really run against the Eagles. And on top of that, opposing offenses typically have to throw the ball in the second half to try to play catch up. So that's allowed a ton of wide receivers to score points against the Eagles so far this season. You'll see later on when we look at the really good matchups that there are some teams that we really want to be targeting. But Giants, I mean, the highest guy in the flogfantasy.com community rankings here is Wan'Dale Robinson. Really hard to be excited about anybody in this range. Now, going over to the Dallas Cowboys, Dallas has a bunch of average matchups. They don't have any that are too bad here. You're going up against the Bills, who are 18th, the Dolphins, who are 12th, the Lions, who are 10th. Now, what's interesting is, if you're looking at these games, they all have shootout potential. We know the Bills, they have the upside to be an elite offense. Not going to happen every week, but we can see that happen every once in a while. We know the Dolphins have the upside to be an elite offense, and we know the Lions look like one of the best offenses in the NFL. So these games for the Cowboys could be extremely high scoring for the fantasy football playoffs. If you're looking at the flogfantasy.com community rankings right now, CeeDee Lamb currently wide receiver 4, directly ahead of Amon-Ra St. Brown, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Justin Jefferson, and directly behind Tyreek, A.J. Brown, Jamar Chase. I think this would be a very fair price point to acquire CeeDee Lamb, and I would like to see if we could go through and maybe send, say, Stephon Diggs and a smaller piece to get to CeeDee Lamb, especially knowing that Lamb's already through his bye. Now, the Packers are an interesting team. They have 2 great matchups. The Bucs have allowed the 4th most points to opposing wide receivers. The Vikings have allowed the 8th most. The Panthers, while they don't necessarily have a great defense overall, just typically a team that you're not throwing on in the second half, right? Carolina's been the worst team in the NFL, pretty damn close to the worst team in the NFL so far this season. It's hard to imagine that it just changes too much. Now, what's interesting is this actually should probably be a close game between the Packers and Panthers. This is going to be like the Dallas game this week, where obviously they're going to stop throwing the ball by the time you get to the second half here. But nonetheless, if you were betting on a Packers receiver, the question is, who would it be, right? Christian Watson has been leading this team in targets, but Watson just simply has not been productive, has not stayed healthy. So if you were to use this information, I don't know if you want to go after any Packers guys. Now, going over to the Saints, you have 2 top 5 matchups. You're going up against the Giants and the Bucs, who've allowed the 3rd and 4th most points to opposing wide receivers. The Rams, kind of whatever. I mean, here they've allowed the 22nd most. It's not horrible. It's not great. But nonetheless, I mean, I think that this means you could go out there and confidently get Chris Olave in. Olave is a wide receiver that in games where he's been healthy is closing in on 10 targets per contest. Right now, he's wide receiver 13. And honestly, going back to one of our sell high options this week, while Mike Evans has been much better than Chris Olave so far this season, if you look at the community rankings on flockfantasy.com, it looks like the majority of y'all are valuing Mike Evans ahead of Chris Olave. And I think based off the playoff schedule, plus based off the consistent volume that Olave's had, I personally would rather have Olave. Now, going up against the Jags, Niners, Dolphins, you will have the Baltimore Ravens. Here, 3 average matchups, right? They're all about top 10. Now, what's crazy is you're going to say, well, Mason, how the hell are the Niners a top 10 pass defense to go up against? Just because you have to throw the ball against the Niners, right? I mean, you see a lot of garbage time points here. But nonetheless, these could be very high-scoring games for the Baltimore Ravens. The primary question is, okay, well, can we go through and can we buy Zay Flowers? And Zay Flowers has had consistent target volume. However, you really haven't seen the production follow in Baltimore just because this overall passing offense isn't really moving the ball down the field. They're just running it consistently. Currently, Zay Flowers is wide receiver 33 in the community rankings. He is in the range of DeAndre Hopkins, Tyler Lockett, Terry McLaurin, Amari Cooper. To be honest with you, probably about where he should belong. I mean, if we were looking at any trades, I mean, Jacoby Myers is wide receiver 36. If you could move from like Myers to Zay Flowers, I think that can make a lot of sense. Now, the Broncos with Sutton and Jerry Jeudy have some beautiful matchups here. You have the Chargers, 5th most points to opposing wide receivers. The Lions and the Pats, who are both borderline top 10. Now, with the Broncos, it's been interesting that they're actually playing better football as of late, specifically on the defensive side of the ball as well. Courtland Sutton has looked great, over the past few weeks. If you are looking at Courtland Sutton so far this season, while, yeah, the touchdown efficiency may come back down to earth, and I'll tell you for a damn fact, Courtland Sutton will not continue to score touchdowns at this clip. Right now, he's had 7 touchdowns off of 57 targets. Very unsustainable regardless of the offense. Still, you've had a couple games with 11 targets. So while I want to say Courtland Sutton's a sell high guy, these touchdowns can't keep up. 2 weeks ago, he only had 3 targets. Then before that, 6, 3, 5. Maybe because of the playoff schedule, you can say, we'll hold on to Sutton. It's funny to see the Lions here as the 10th team in allowing the most wide receiver points. If you look at the projection on Underdog Fantasy right now, they have Courtland Sutton at 54.5 receiving yards. And to be honest with you, I'm probably going to be going with fewer than 54.5 receiving yards this week for Sutton. He had 53 this past week, the week prior, 29, 46, 13, 27, 32. He's had 3 games this season with 55 receiving yards or more. So while he's coming off a couple touchdowns, take the fewer than 54.5 receiving yards. And of course, if you want to check out that pick'em over on Underdog Fantasy, you can find that link in the description, in the comment section. Promo code FLOCK, 100% deposit match, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers. And also code FLOCK is going to get you set up with an Ahmad-Ra St. Brown special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard as well. But let's move this over to the Eagles. And to be honest with you, the Eagles, about the same as what we have with the Broncos here. You're going up against the Seahawks, Giants, Cardinals. The Giants have allowed the 3rd most points to opposing wide receivers so far this season. Seahawks, Cardinals are right in the middle of the road. So ultimately, you have a great matchup and then 2 average ones. So it's not like we have to be worried about anything here. If you're looking at Devonta Smith currently in these rankings on flockfantasy.com, keep in mind these are the community rankings, not my own. You have Devonta Smith at wide receiver 16, which I think based off the Dallas Goedert injury, that's a very fair price point if you were going to buy him. Now going over to the Rams, we have Puka right next to Smith in these rest of season rankings. And the Rams undoubtedly have a better schedule rest of season where you're going up against the Commanders and Giants. If you remember, the Commanders are the team that allows that massive blow up no matter who is going up against them. If you are the best receiving option in your offense, if you are even a running back, Ramondre Stevenson, even if you are a tight end, Darren Waller, Obviously, if you're a receiver like DJ Moore, if you're the best receiving option in your offense, you will be flooded with targets and you have big plays going up against the Commanders. I think you can be really excited about both Cooper Kupp and Puka with this playoff schedule. Sounds like you also have Matthew Stafford fully good to go. He did get in a full practice on Wednesday. And if you currently look at Puka's pick'em on Underdog Fantasy, he's at 65 in app receiving yards. You have Cooper Kupp at 81.5 for this week. So, I mean, these guys are projecting out to be a wide receiver 1 and I and wide receiver 2 rest of the year. So maybe Puka could be a very buy low candidate, very much a buy low candidate, that is, at 17 in the rest of season rankings. Now, going over to the Cardinals, you have two good matchups. You have the Niners have allowed the 9th most points, the Eagles who have allowed the most points. With Arizona, they will be trailing in those games. They will have to throw the ball in the second half. You have the Bears who have allowed the 17th most points, so right in the middle of the road, but you have the best defense you can be going up against, another top 10 option, and then a middle of the road option. I think Hollywood Brown could also be another buy low candidate. I mean, if you are looking at Hollywood Brown, while yes, he wasn't great with Kyler Murray under center this past week, at the same time, if you look at the historical splits for Hollywood, he's been much better in games where Kyler Murray has played versus in games where Kyler Murray hasn't. Then our best team will be the Seattle Seahawks, where the Seahawks have 3 prime matchups. The Eagles, who have allowed the most points, the Titans, who have allowed the 7th most points, and the Steelers, who have allowed the 6th most points to opposing wide receivers. These are secondaries we want to be attacking, and obviously there are a lot of Seattle wide receivers you can look at. JSN is ranked wide receiver 40 in the rest of season rankings. You have Tyler Lockett at 32 and DK Metcalf at 21. Now, what an interesting thing to look at here is how are we going to go through and determine which guy we are buying at these prices? Obviously, if you were just ranking them yourself, you'd say, okay, yeah, DK Metcalf's the guy that I want above all else. But ultimately, you have to consider the prices that you'll be getting a discount if you out there and pick up Jackson Smith and Jigba. And possibly that is something that you want to do, in that if you are looking at JSN, this is that rookie wide receiver that should continue to expand his role as the season goes on. So maybe if you think 4 to 5 weeks from now, JSN's going to have a much larger role, this offense is going to have great matchups, maybe you want to be picking up JSN for close to free at this moment with a healthy Metcalf and Lockett. But I think that's all I have for y'all in this video. If y'all enjoyed it, please go down there, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And of course, if you wanted to check out any of those pick'ems over on Underdog Fantasy, you can find that link in the live chat, in the description, in the comment section. Promo code FLOCK, 100% deposit match, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers. And on top of that, ladies and gentlemen, you'll be getting a Amon-Ra St. Brown special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard for the game this Sunday. But I think that's all I have for you. Again, thank you for everything. I really do appreciate you, and really hope we get to see you out in the live stream later tonight.